The news day continues here on One News Now Business. I am Danny Laurel. Now here are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate fronts. The Philippines is planning a benchmark-sized retail dollar bond offer as the government boosts infrastructure spending. Finance Chief Ben Diokno says the country will likely announce the schedule in Washington next month. The benchmark-sized offering is often understood to mean one for at least $500 million. In this case, the exact size remains to be determined. The planned borrowing will be the first dollar-denominated bonds targeting individuals and other retail investors under the Marcos administration. President Bongbong Marcos wants more housing projects under his Build Better More initiative. Marcos Jr. vowed to prioritize the country's housing backlog, noting that the issue is close to his heart. He called for increased public-private collaboration in constructing decent and affordable shelters during his term. The president led the ceremonial turnover of 1,380 housing units under the St. Gregory Homes project in Malabon. It is spearheaded by the National Housing Authority under the government's Build Better More housing program.
Aking inaatasan muli ang NHA, DSUD at ang iba pang mga kaugnay na ahensya ng pamahalaan na magpatuloy sa masusing pagbibigay lunas sa ating suliranin sa pabahay at tiyakin na walang sino man na maiiwanan at mapapabayaan sa ating sama-sama na pagsulong at sa ating sama-sama na pag-unlad.
The Tourism Department said it wants to train tourism workers affected by the oil spill for alternative livelihood. The agency says this is to ensure that tourism workers will find an alternate source of income. The DOT also vows to provide social protection for workers, this as the oil spill has already affected 63 tourism sites and up to 1,000 workers. The agency has also directed regional offices to craft a recovery action plan to guide affected stakeholders. The DOT, though, says business remains usual in Puerto Galera. Now, S&P Global Ratings has raised its GDP forecast for the Philippines this year, although the credit rater warned that elevated inflation and high interest rates may dampen growth. The credit rater now expects the local economy to expand by 5.8% this 2023. That's faster than its previous forecast of 5.2%. S&P senior economist Vincent Conti said the momentum of domestic demand has stayed stronger for longer than they had expected, prompting them to raise their GDP outlook for 2023. However, the updated forecast remains below the government's growth target of 6 to 7%. S&P says that while the country benefited from the impact of economic reopening, inflation and policy tightening could weigh on growth later this year and in 2024. Fitch Solutions expects the Bangko Sentral to continue its policy tightening during its next meeting in May. Fitch Solutions Country Risk and Industry Research anticipates the BSP to hike rates by another 25 basis points in May to 6.5%. Fitch Solutions says this could mark the end of the BSP's monetary tightening cycle. But Finance Chief Ben Diokno, who sits as member of the Monetary Board, earlier said the Bangko Sentral may implement a pause in May, saying the BSP has, quote, done enough. And just last week, the BSP raised rates by 25 basis points, bringing the benchmark rate to a near 16-year high of 6.25%. Since May of 2022, the central bank has increased rates by 425 basis points, making it one of the most aggressive in Asia. We'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. still watching One News Now. I'm Dani Laurel. The Agriculture Department is validating projections for a possible pork shortage in April. Data from the DA National Livestock Program projects a supply shortfall of over 56,000 metric tons by next month. But DA spokesperson Rex Estoperas explained that it does not take into account the inventory of imported pork. He said they will have a clearer picture of the supply situation later this month once it reconciles its data with the industry input.
Yung atin pong projection na yan does not include yung atin pong inventory of atin pong imported. Kung nakikita natin ang projection, talagang kukulangin tayo. And that's the time yung sinasabi ko nga kanina, if we have the final figure, then we can say na ilan ba, kung mag-import man tayo, ilan ang volume na kailangan natin. Pero for now, we cannot declare on that kasi nakikita pa rin natin not the final figure and not a harmonized figure between with government na sa atin bigyan ng projection and the stakeholders.
The National Grid Corporation of the Philippines highlighted the importance of ancillary services in ensuring there will be no outages during the dry season. This after the Energy Regulatory Commission denied its request for monthly extensions of its ancillary service agreements. These service agreements support the transmission of power from generators to consumers and are necessary to maintain reliable operations. The NGCP says that while there is enough power to meet demand at the moment, the lack of contracts for ancillary services may affect certain industries through power fluctuations.
So while on paper, there should be no issue, kasi there is enough power to meet both supply, demand for consumption, and also yung ancillary services natin. Right now, there's an artificial lack of ancillary services because although it's there, we cannot dispatch it because we have no contractual arrangement.
The Fiscal Incentives Review Board says it is fast-tracking the resolution on the issue on value-added tax zero rating for local purchases made by exporters. This as exporters warn that failure to resolve the issue may force them to consider imports instead of local purchases. The board said it formed a technical working group to evaluate the issue from an operational and legal standpoint. The technical working group is composed of representatives from the Department of Finance, Trade, and the Bureau of Internal Revenue. Keppel Philippines is selling its entire stake in the entity behind the Podium complex. Keppel said its board approved the stake of its 40% stake in SM Keppel Land Incorporated on March 25th. Keppel, along with another seller, Oponke Properties, will hand over to BDO their combined 50% stake. BDO said it will consolidate its ownership of the complex consisting of the Podium West Tower and the Podium Mall. The BDO board approved the purchase on the same day, but the value of the transaction was not disclosed by the parties. Now, how did Credit Suisse's crisis exactly unfold? Let's take a look at the events that took a 150-year-old institution known for Swiss stability to the brink.
From Credit Suisse to crisis. They say all press is positive, but Credit Suisse has had more than its share of bad headlines. Founded in 1856 by industrialist Alfred Escher, the Swiss bank grew to become one of the biggest financial services companies, operating in around 50 countries across the world. It came out of the 2008 financial crisis in a relatively strong position and did not take any government bailouts. In the aftermath, the bank cut jobs as it pivoted away from risky investment banking to focus on wealth management. That brought problems and was soon pulled into a number of cases for assisting tax evasion.
We should have caught it. We should have had managers. We should have had control people who caught the fact that this was happening. But absolutely, they were wantonly violating our policies.
Its global presence brought risks. Raising $2 billion of funding for Mozambique's fishing industry saw Credit Suisse drawn into a wire fraud criminal probe. In March 2019, it emerged that Credit Suisse had hired private investigators to spy on a former employee it suspected of taking its clients.
Our shareholders have been extremely robust. If you look at the share price, it's not the share price of a company in crisis.
2 years later came more problems. The collapse of supply chain financing company Greensill Capital embroiled the bank. Swiss regulator FINMA said it made partly false and overly positive statements when it marketed $10 billion of funds to clients as a safe investment. But soon after came Archegos Capital Management. The collapse of Archegos brought Credit Suisse $5 billion of losses and saw executives fired. It's also found itself the first Swiss bank to receive a criminal conviction tied to a cocaine smuggler. Efforts to reassure investors ran into problems.
The outflows basically have stopped. What we saw is 2-3 weeks in October, boom. And since then, flattening out, they have stopped. It's gradually coming back, in particular in Switzerland.
That saw FINMA open another investigation when the bank reported those outflows had continued. As the bad news came in, losses mounted and investors became even more wary, including its biggest, the Saudi National Bank.
I'm wondering whether you would be open to assisting further if there was another call for additional liquidity from Credit Suisse.
The answer is absolutely not, for many reasons, outside the simplest reason, which is regulatory and statutory.
And those few words were enough to send Credit Suisse shares diving to an all-time low. Even a $54 billion lifeline from the Swiss National Bank could not erase all the losses. It may have lasted 167 years, but Credit Suisse will be remembered for this one.
And those are the top business stories of the hour. I'm Danny Laurel. Join us again at 2 p.m. We are One News, all sides, all the time.